We are still months before the election, but I got to tell you, I am worried about what comes afterwards. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Marc, we have talked so much about all of the problems that could happen leading up to Election Day. Mail-in ballots getting tossed, voter purges, voter intimidation. But there's a whole different set of problems that could occur after Election Day. What are you worried about?
I worry about so much, Paige. Like you said, we spend so much time worrying, day to day, week to week about what is happening in this legislature, what's happening in that court. That, as you say, sometimes it's hard. It's hard to look, project out a few months and say, what's the thing that's coming? What's the bear in the woods that hasn't yet emerged from the woods? And that is, of course, the post-election period. And just to recap for people who don't remember, in 2020, we were told by a whole lot of Republicans, don't worry. If Donald Trump loses, he'll concede. Then we had the election, he didn't concede. And then people said, he's just going through a few things. Okay, first of all, he's a grown man. He's the president of the United States. Why does he get time to go through a few things? But anyway, they said he's going through a few things. He just needs to get it out of his system. He will eventually concede. Instead, what we saw was an unprecedented attack on our elections in the aftermath of the election. We saw 65 lawsuits. I was proud my team and I represented Joe Biden and the Democratic Party in those. We won 64 of the 65. The one that we lost had no practical impact. But even after we saw these lawsuits, we saw Republicans say, he's just having his day in court. Don't you believe everyone has a day in court? Well, after he had his day in court, we saw a violent insurrection in the nation's capital on January 6th, where Republicans lined up behind him. And even that didn't break the fever, Paige. That didn't break the fever. We are now in full swing election denialism of the Republican Party, and the warning signs are out there. The warning signs, the Republicans are saying the quiet part out loud. In fact, I don't even think they think it's the quiet part. I think they think it's the loud part. They are prepared to contest the outcome of the 2020 election. I just wrote a piece on Democracy Docket that hopefully everyone has read about the asymmetry of election denialism, in which, I point out Donald Trump is already saying that he believes he won Minnesota last time. He believes he will win New York and New Jersey this time. And those are not just rantings. He is setting up a permission structure for him to say that the election was stolen from him everywhere he didn't win, in every single state. So I am principally worried that you have a political party that is already preparing to contest the elections. There was a poll in Arizona, Page, that I talk about in this Democracy Docket piece. 47% of Republicans in Arizona want Donald Trump to contest the outcome of the election in Arizona if he loses. Contested on what basis? The election hasn't even happened yet. There have been no votes. How could they already be committed to contesting an election that hasn't taken place? So I'm very worried that the Republican Party doesn't need an excuse this time. They don't even need the fig leaf this time. They are just going to fight in the post-election, both in the court of public opinion, and we saw violence in 2020, and I am very worried about 2024.
One of the things you've talked about before, Marc, is how Republicans have broken norms of democracy and how these norms are actually very important to ensuring a peaceful transfer of power, a free and fair election. Can you explain exactly what you mean, what those norms are, and how they've been broken?
Sure. So the norms start with the idea that we expect people before the election to have faith and instill confidence in the election, to promote the role of election workers, to promote voting. And instead, we see every day Donald Trump and the Republicans denigrate election officials and they attack voting. I mean, just, shortly after the news media, was fawning over him for, basically recording a hostage video saying that he supported vote by mail. It took him only a few days to again attack vote by mail in the state of Pennsylvania. So, the first norm breaking is the incessant attacking of our election systems and the undermining of confidence in the elections. We've also seen the attacking of election workers. But after the election takes place, the most important norms happen, which is that we expect the defeated candidates to concede. Hillary Clinton called Donald Trump on election night to concede, and she gave a gracious concession speech the next day. John Kerry conceded the day after the election. Al Gore conceded as soon as the Supreme Court ruled in Bush versus Gore, an election decided by one state by just a few hundred votes. So we expect these kinds of concessions, and by the way, it's bipartisan. Mitt Romney and John McCain both conceded graciously to Barack Obama when he won. But it begins with that. After that, we have this pageantry of democracy, which starts with the unofficial election results that are called in at the local polling locations to their counties. That's what AP and the networks are usually relying on when they call elections on election nights, is those sort of unofficial results. Then those become canvassed by the counties. They turn them from unofficial results into official results. And those canvasses are usually celebratory events. They are events in which everyone comes together and makes sure that all the I's are dotted and T's crossed. And those election results become the official accepted election results of the county. Then those go to the state. More celebratory certifications. By the way, there's a whole lot of calligraphy, a whole lot of certificates with ribbons and all of this. The governor puts a ribbon in presidential elections on something that then goes to the National Archives and to the Congress. That goes in a wooden box. Remember the wooden boxes that everyone's opening and everyone's very proud of on the floor of the House and the Senate. And those are counted by the tellers. The tellers count them, and the electors are meeting before that, before they're counted. You have the electors meeting in states around the country. This pageantry of democracy serves a really important cultural moment, because at each one of these stages, it is a reaffirmation of the peaceful transfer of power. Ultimately, we have the swearing in of the new president on January 20th, where the old president attends. There have only been two times where the outgoing president hasn't attended. One was after the Civil War, when Andrew Johnson, who was sympathetic to the insurrectionist South, who became president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he refused to attend the inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant, who had been the general who had defeated the South. The only other time was Donald Trump, who didn't come on the 20th. And that was a capstone to the attack on this pageantry of democracy. Donald Trump, famously called the county election officials at Wayne County, Michigan, to try to get them not to certify the elections. He attacked the certification process repeatedly, rhetorically, and in court. And then obviously he tried to get Mike Johnson, who was then a backbencher, to try to prevent certification in the House of Representatives. And then obviously the violent insurrection. All of this, the loss of that pageantry is a real loss to the commitment to free and fair elections. And I expect in 2024, we will again see, Republicans refuse if Joe Biden wins, or even at this House and Senate level, we see now a refusal to participate in that pageantry of democracy.
That whole pageantry of democracy that you just described encompasses election certification, which is, like you said, kind of just the rubber stamping, the validation of official election results. But we saw in 2022 a little bit this year with some local elections, the certification process getting disrupted very early on. And then it's a bit of a domino effect. It causes larger problems for states when it gets closer to election certification deadlines. Explain to us what exactly the issues happening around election certification are, and what states and Congress have kind of done to stop it before it begins.
Yeah, so this is one of these soft spots of democracy that bad faith actors exploited in 2020, and as you say, again, we saw in 2022, and we continue to see in elections since the midterms, which is that these certifications are, as you say, supposed to be sort of formality. They are ministerial acts. They are done traditionally by bipartisan canvassing boards who really don't have any authority other than to, look at the math, say, okay, one candidate got 2,100 votes and another candidate in my county got 2,000 votes, and we put those two numbers on a pre-filled out form in, like I said, in calligraphy. We sign the document, we put a nice big ribbon on it, and we send it on to the state, and it serves a really important public function, but it's not intended to be anything other than that. But the problem is, Paige, it's an essential function, right? Like, you cannot certify your elections unless you have those certificates, unless those certificates make their way to the governor and the secretary of state in the cases of some states for congressional elections and for all Senate elections. Like, you need those pieces of calligraphy paper that I'm kind of partially joking about, because they are legally significant. They're legally essential to the process. And so when we saw counties in 2022 refuse to certify elections or delayed to certify elections, it actually delays the process by which the new person becomes, the office holder elect, and can delay ultimately them taking office. And that is a really, really big deal. Obviously, when it happens anywhere, but at the presidential election, it can be a catastrophic effect. So, we've seen states try to harden these systems, try to make clear that these are ministerial. We saw Congress pass the Electoral Count Act, which was intended to deal with this question specifically as it relates to certification of presidential elections in the chambers, in the House and Senate, though not really at the local level. There are really good explainers about all of this on Democracy Docket. If people want to learn more about the Electoral Count Act, there are really good explainers. And this is one of the core things that Democracy Docket will be covering between now and Election Day. So make sure you are subscribed in the links below. It is free. And if you want to become a premium member, you can do that as well, also in the links below. But all of this is really, really important stuff, because the election happened, but the people don't take office without that intermediate period. And that is where Republicans have attacked, and where we have seen some efforts to try to harden the system.
I think some people believe that we're kind of hyperbolic sometimes, Mark, when we're explaining these election issues, that we say that these are problems and they're like, but that doesn't happen. You're worrying about nothing. But we really saw that happen in 2022 in Cochise County, Arizona, right? Where you had 3 election board members who had to certify the results just for Cochise County, 2 of whom were Republicans, one was a Democrat, and the 2 Republicans refused to certify results. And they didn't have any real reason to. They were just like, we don't really like how this election happened. We think that there were problems, not really in our county, but in some other counties. So we're not going to certify results. And those 2 people held up certification for Cochise, which held up certification for the entire state of Arizona, which held up Arizona. Maybe it ultimately didn't, because lawsuits were filed and people got involved, but it almost risked Arizona's congressional candidates from getting to Congress, because you need, like you said, that official scroll that makes its way to whoever, to say these are our real election results. We certify these as the winners. And that was 2 people that held up a state. Imagine that in a presidential election year, where 2 people can hold up presidential election results for the entire country.
Right. And Republicans tried it in 2020, like I said, in Michigan and in some other places. And, there was a big debate a few years ago about whether to take Donald Trump literally or seriously. If we've learned nothing else, we need to take him both literally and seriously. He may be a clown, but what he says, what comes out of his mouth, is actually what he means. The stuff that he reads off a teleprompter, he doesn't necessarily believe, but the stuff he ad libs off the teleprompter, he definitely believes. The things that he may read in a commercial, he doesn't necessarily believe, but the things he says extemporaneously to reporters, he definitely believes. And so when Donald Trump says that he believes that they're going to, have to contest the election, believe him. When last time he refused to concede and ultimately called people and said not to certify election, we have to believe him. I mean, the Republican Party, I'll pay for the Republican Party to get therapy if they would just stop, fomenting insurrection and contesting the outcome of elections. They're working through some stuff for real, but they're not going to get therapy. Instead, they're going to keep doing this. There was just a poll, Page. There was just a poll that half Americans think there's going to be violence after the election. So it's not me, or you making up this hyperbole. Why do people think there's going to be violence after the election? Because there was violence after the last election, right? We saw violence on January 6th, and Donald Trump is talking in ways that really are deeply concerning. There is no one who wants a free and fair election more than I do. There is no one who wants a peaceful transfer of power more than I do. There is no one who would celebrate a quiet post-election period. I promise you, no one would celebrate a quiet post-election period more than I would. And but the reason why we sound these alarms is not to be alarmist. We sound these alarms because this is the reality of the world in which we live right now. Donald Trump and the Republican Party not only want to make it harder to vote, they are trying to make it easier to cheat after the election. That is why they bring litigation, for example, in Republicans and their allies have brought litigation in 3 states to enable the harassment of election officials. That is not hyperbole. They literally believe they have a constitutional right to harass election officials. Why would you want the ability to harass election officials? This is one of the reasons why. Why would you oppose laws that require certification to take place in an orderly, mandatory fashion? Because you don't want certification to take place if you haven't won. So this is a big problem. This is a topic that we will be covering more of on Democracy Docket. So make sure you are subscribed to our daily and weekly newsletters. And thank you once again for joining us at Democracy Docket.